Thank you so much. So nice to see everyone. Why don't we be able to look at one another as we say the blessing for study? It translates, "Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us sacred with commandments and commands us to engage with words of Torah." So with so many people on, it's hard to hear a lot of voices, but we're going to use the chat, and Mara's going to bring things forward for us, and we'll engage together. So I'm so pleased to be able to do this. Nice to see familiar faces in particular, and lovely to be with everyone. So, La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I'm going to screen share. This is the messy part. I think it gets better, but that's my beautiful family. So you got to love that part, right? Okay. Oh, that wasn't as bad as usual. So here we are with a horrible name, but on purpose. And I was looking up how to say what I was trying to bring forward. And there is this word that I had never heard before. Maybe some of you had, memoricide. I don't even know if I'm fully pronouncing it right, but the idea is to get rid of harmful memories. And it seems to be on a personal level, and also often has to do with, I think, if it's, such a trauma through a medication or through, some kind of other therapy that is strong enough to be able to help people move on. But I'm bringing this national. So this week's Parsha, it's actually double Parsha, has so much in it. And I was tempted to go with like one of my regulars, and I decided not to. So let's hope it's for the best. All right, here's where we are. So we are in the wilderness. It is after the scouts bring back this bad report in Numbers chapter 14. Which makes the Israelites condemned to be in the wilderness for 40 years until this generation dies out, with the exception of two, Joshua, who will take on Moses' leadership after Moses dies, and Caleb. And so this is where we are entering into this portion, and quite literally, physically, coming into this portion. So, in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho, Adonai spoke to Moses saying. So on the one hand, we might think that's not all that interesting. On the other hand, we might think, hey, why is it telling us where we are, right? We know the Moabites are arch enemies. We are so close to the land, right? At the Jordan near Jericho. And yet can't go in for 40 years. So it's like sort of go nearby and then go in the other direction. It's the joke of the people don't ask for directions. But that being said, this is actually in about 40 years where Moses when Moses dies, the Israelites will be in mourning. So in Deuteronomy 34, it notes that. So on the one hand, that's later than where we are, but on the other hand, the idea that this place is going to have a lot of different kinds of memories and emotions connected with it, which is frankly what most of our places are, right? But we want to get right into this text. I chose a very short section of Torah, Numbers 33, 50 through 56. I like to dig down as much as I can with everyone. So we begin. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan, that's the Jordan River, right? So that's the eastern side. When you cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. What, right? We might, if you're looking at a text, you're probably looking ahead and seeing what's next. But if you're not looking at the text and you're stuck with my slide, we might think about, well, what would be next, right? What could be coming? And given this is not the Israelites who are actually going to be entering the land, other than those two, why tell them this, right? why saying, okay, when you cross in, meaning, okay, in years to come, this stuff is going to happen. But this is what we're about to look at is right then, when you get in, first thing to do, right? First thing to do is to do what's coming next. So I'm going to leave that a little mysterious for just a second. So my first question, I invite you to use the chat, please, is why tell the the current generation something that they are not going to experience, right? They're not going to be the ones actually doing what God is telling them to do. So why tell that generation? So if we have any comments, oh, sorry about that. Oh, I didn't want to do that because now you can see everything. All right, there it is. Sometimes my chat doesn't show up very well when oh, there it is. Yay. Okay. So the question is, yes, thank you for placing us in terms of the West Bank and so forth, right? And the symbolism of 40, right, is from before being in when 40s are big, frankly, but when Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days, when the spies are gone for 40 days and they come back with a negative report, that's the actual 40, but 40 is a big number here. So any other ideas in terms of this idea of why tell the next sorry, why I keep doing that. I'm trying to read the chat at the same time. Right. So to give a sense of hope and purpose, Marjorie, thank you, at the end of their journey. Right. Right, generation to generation, what we do impacts our children, right? So it's kind of a prep thing for our children, maybe. I love that. It's a journey, not the destination, right? I also think of kind of means and ends in a less kind of biblical way. So there are different ideas we might think about this, where they've just, recently been told you're not going to make it into the land because of what you did. And you got a lot more time here in the wilderness, right? So maybe it is a kind of hope. And also, all right, let's make sure our kids get it right. We blew it. Let's make sure the kids get it right as they go in. And then when we think about this, actually, we might think, well, okay, so this seems to be of great importance. The very first thing you're to do, and I think about when American Jews first really start to settle, there's a little trickle, and then there's a bigger trickle. So in 1654 is usually a date, and we think about what did they do, right, to establish themselves, right? What did you have to do? And that's kind of the practical end. But this is from God of what do you need to do? And so this is the next slide is really where we're going to be focusing our attention today. And so I have colors and everything on it. Okay, so so when you enter the land, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the land. You shall destroy all their figured objects. You shall destroy all their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. Wow. Right? So you are going to wipe out everything that has to do with idolatry, as we see here. And Mara, I'm gonna depend on you, especially to look at chats and things like that. So let's just start with the question of all the inhabitants of the land. So in Deuteronomy later, and I didn't bring up this slide, but you can look it up, Deuteronomy 20:16. You must not allow a single soul of 7 nations who are the enemy to survive. We're going to have a lot of moral issues with this. But here, it's not about them. It's about anybody. So the commentary from Orach Chaim is that it's all who dwell in the land. That even the non sort of enemy people, the others who are kind of hanging out, right? The kind of resident aliens, maybe, were to be driven out, who are not members of these 7 nations. And again, I shouldn't say again, it was in my head the first time, that that there's a lot of resonance for us I think, in this text, right? In terms of who gets to stay in countries, right? And who doesn't. And so Ora Chaim is making the point also that while the others are not to be killed, right? Unlike in Deuteronomy, they are maybe not to be killed because, frankly, Israel couldn't pull it off. They wouldn't have the strength to do it, but they can make sure that all shall leave, right? All the inhabitants shall leave, right? So when we think about this, it's an interesting idea, in a way more human to drive them out than more humane to drive them out rather than to kill them. But on the other side, wow, right? Completely empty of anyone who was there when the Israelites get into the land. So that might make us be thinking about things. And so as we look at this, right, I'm seeing a lot of, I'm half seeing the chat, which I always save so that I can look at later also. But right, so it's really interesting when we think about this in terms of God commanding. I just saw what Deb wrote, right, about us being fully present. And on the other hand, the human side of the people and what would actually happen to them, right? So we see that this is really about idolatry. So let's look at these words. So I'm going to start with actually the yellow words as it is. So what are these places? And one of the things is very interesting is I don't know your Hebrew, but here it's maskiotam, and here it's masechotam. So I don't know if you can fully hear it. The tam at the end means there, but at the same time, uh, um, the other part of this, an M sound and S sound, either a kaf or a chaf, so a k or a ch, are not the same roots, because this letter differs from this letter, as even if you don't read Hebrew, you can see, and yet they sound the same. And it's really interesting because, in fact, there's a connection made between these. So I want to just get into this. So what is it? What's the difference, for example, in the translation of destroying their figured objects and destroying their molten images? Granted, figured objects could be made of different materials, right, rather than molten. But at the same time, it's just really unclear of why be kind of that repetitious. So the idea, in fact, that in terms of what they are to destroy, this, this word right here, with a sin, maskiotam, is actually the places of worship. This is what Rashi says, right? And very specifically makes this idea of the places of worship have to do with the fact that these are stones. So if they're to destroy stones that make up a place of worship, the idea is that it would be stones on the ground where people would prostrate themselves, right? Get down on hands and knees, or maybe all the way flat, to prostrate themselves to their gods, right? And for us, we would say small g gods, right? But to their gods, which is saying that part of this is about place, right? So get rid of the places where they are, places where these cults are meeting. And one of the things that's interesting is that Rashi gets this again from this word and the connection to this word. He says they're actually connected, which this sounds really me to say, but I'm wondering if a scribe like miswrote a letter or repeated something they shouldn't have. I mean, it's unclear what's going on here exactly, because it's not clear in the commentaries exactly what this refers to. But if it is related to a word we know, schach, Sukkot, we shouldn't even, we might be thinking, I've heard that before. When is that? Well, we're completely on the wrong time of year. But on Sukkot, the roof, as it were, of the sukkah, right, the naturally made materials are schach, which means to cover, the covering, right? So the schach, covering of the sukkah, is the idea of the covering of the floor, of the ground in these stones. And that's where Rashi gets this from. Okay. The idea of the uh, molten images or the cast images, a different translation, right, is that you need to obviously get rid of those as well. And finally, a word that we know, and I'm going to go back to all of this in a second, but bamotav, bama in singular, is a word that we usually pronounce as bima, which is just simply a raised platform, right? So if you think of in a synagogue, many synagogues will have the raised platform on the eastern side of the sanctuary. Some will have a raised platform in the middle of the sanctuary, right? Or have even both. But that they have raised platforms. So we have now, right? We have a place to, as it were, to prostrate oneself in front of the idols. We have the idols themselves, right? These molten images. And we have cult places, which aren't necessarily like a constructed bima that we think of today, but might be just a higher up, right? So if you are on, some kind of a hill or a mound, and maybe you did make it, or maybe it's natural, we can understand why one of the ways to worship, because we do it ourselves, is to look up, right? So now we have 3 parts of the first thing you do when you get in, is you are going to get rid of all these people. We're going to see more of that in a minute. You're going to get rid of all of the people, all of the people, and then you are going to get rid of anything that is a reminder of idolatry. So I want to pause in 1 second to get comments, but I want to specifically say that Hamak Tavar gives this commentary that saying that there's a repetition here in terms of destroying and demolishing. And this is what is in the first case. You can remove, in this case, if we're thinking about it as these stones, you can remove from their place and you can benefit from them. In other words, you can recycle, right? You can use them again, right? But if you have a cast metal or whatever it is, molten idol, you have to completely get rid of it. You have to completely get rid of it. And we might think of that in our own history, our own darker history, right, of the golden calf, right? It wasn't where they melted it back down and made some pretty jewelry and did all kinds of things like that, right? It was not to be used again. You could not repurpose that golden calf, right? And so here too, you cannot repurpose these molten images. However, you can repurpose the stones. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But any comments or particular questions that come up, let's just pause for a minute so we can be as interactive as possible. And Mara, if you see anything in particular to bring us up, to mention, let me know.
Yeah, I just I don't know the extent to which everyone is following the chat, but like I think this is intense and there's like a lot of messages here, and it's sometimes hard to look at this and not just like see images in our mind of what's on the news. And so like trying to stay in the text for now and not overwrite exactly what's going on in the world. So I I'm also having a little bit of a hard time getting a sense of like people's tone because that doesn't read so well in the chat all the time. And so I think if anyone has any clarifying questions that they have, that you can raise your hand, or if there's like a short message that you're taking away from this so far.
Thanks.
You're welcome to
And
raise your hand.
I opened the door, which I didn't have to because you were seeing Julie's. Give me 1 second. To the idea of I think in many ways there are parts of this short portion that are going to get us thinking about today. And so I understand I opened that up, but I also think that if we can dig down for these 45 minutes, whatever's left of the 45 minutes into the text, it might be able to help us move forward in other communities and have conversations and so forth. So anyway, okay,
Thank
can we
you.
hear from Julius?
The question that I would like to ask, and I can definitely see the parallels. How can I say this? He's basically telling, get the idolatry out of our lives. And I'm going to be very honest. We're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of it.
Thank
And
you.
I think that's the purpose of this whole Torah portion. We've got to get the idolatry out of our lives. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean a statue, a Buddha statue, or a Hindu god, or anything like that. But if you put anything before Hashem, you're committing idolatry. Even if you idolize a rabbi, you're committing idolatry. And that's what I see in this Torah portion.
I appreciate it, Julius. Thank you. And
Thank
if
you.
I can pick up from there, I think that I've been doing a lot of teaching about the Ten Commandments, including through my Jewish learning. But sometimes I ask people if the idolatry commandment, meaning the do not, is still relevant. Like who has any idols around, and whatever it is, and it always gets into that conversation, right? And so while you were speaking, I picked up my phone. There's my family again. I picked up my phone because that's what somebody said, right? If we spend so much time and energy and whatever on something, right, other than God and beyond, right? God and the commandments and the people and all of that, that we are idolaters. So I appreciate that very much. And it's really interesting, right? In terms of wiping out every last smidgen, right, of this. So, here is my question then, right? For us as well, and I'm going to take us a little bit away from what you just said, though I really appreciate that you brought it forward. But let's think about this in terms of are there whether I guess items today or even other areas where something is beyond the pale and cannot be reused for values-based reasons, right? So
Ooh.
those stones cannot be reused, right? So, excuse me, I apologize, that was wrong. They can be reused if they are, as they were, virgin stones, they're called, that were originally attached to the ground. They can be reused, but they shouldn't be recognizable. So they can be damaged, they can be changed around, whatever. But once they're taken out and replaced somewhere else, yes. I don't know if I said that very clearly, but anyway, they can be reused. Other things are beyond the pale. So for everyone, are there things now that you think about that are just beyond the pale of no, you can't use those?
Hmm.
Any thoughts? Yeah, so the idolatry Lois is saying, right, could refer to those of the Hebrews that are not entering the land, right? That's interesting. I think obviously I had more time to think about my question than you do. Right. Food is interesting, right? In terms of if it's already been served, right? Even if it's just on a buffet, you can't give it to someone else. AI is a very interesting question. Thank you. I wouldn't have even thought of that. I appreciate that, right? Um, and I also think about the idea of, for example, um, while a synagogue could purchase a church, or a church could purchase a synagogue to use to sort of decommission, I think that's church language, right? Different peoples can use different buildings is really interesting to me. One of my synagogues that I currently serve used to be a church, right? And in a sense, it looks like it was built like a church, but it doesn't exactly fully feel, obviously, like a church now. But so that's an interesting question. Obviously, I'm not saying that anyone is an idolater here, but the question is in terms of, um, uh, what's okay and what isn't okay. And I think of research, and I'm going down a dark place at the moment, but in terms of, you know, uh, I'll use the word doctor lightly, but Dr. Mengele, right, in the Holocaust, and the research that he did, right, was so horribly inhumane. And that's the big ethical question. Can it be used if now it would help other people, or because it could, I don't know, promote, but allow for the methods, the means to be unethical, then no, absolutely not, get rid of it, just like we're getting rid of idolatry. So, yeah, so I think that it's just interesting in terms of all of this, right? Um, right. So what is wrong with idolatry is the great question here. And thank you for bringing it forward, right? And the problem is, right, if God is the one who's allowing us to get into land, as we're about to see in the text, then anything against God, right, is going to be verboten, right? So not even a trace, though, and that's what I'm trying to really dig into. Susie.
Um, Thank you. Anything in this world can be used for good or bad.
Hmm.
This is why we have free will. I think idolatry for me is more putting anything above God or instead of God, not the things themselves. So when you talk about the research with Mengele, which is beyond horrible, it can be sanctified, the results, if it can do some good and save life. It just will have nothing to do with him, like whatever that famous person's name that's blotted out of history in our history should be, so should his name be. But I don't think knowledge is something that's bad. I just think it's how it can be used that is bad.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate that, because I think the debate here, like I said, and I'm not an expert in any way, but the ethical debate is, does it kind of open the door to other people to engage in unethical research practices, so the means don't matter as much as the end. And so right, that already happened, and maybe we could use it, but does it say to others, oh yeah, you know what, you can stretch the limits of, humanity
Not
while.
to anyone sane. I hear what you're saying, and you're right, but not to anyone sane. But
Yeah, well, but I think this is the point, right, of what we bring up here. And I think it's just really interesting in terms of thinking about, okay, the stones can be used, but the images can't be used. Jim.
I was just wondering how much of the gold is left from the golden calf, if that could be, because it has to be completely destroyed. Was it just melted down, or is there still gold around that is um, being used? I'm sorry to bother you guys. Thank you.
No, you're not bothering at all. But it was just gone, right? There's nothing left of it,
Oh,
right?
good, good.
mean, that we know of, right? It's not like anyone's, as much as people are searching for the ark and both arks, right? As it were, Noah's and the other, it's no one's searching for the remains of the golden calf, but it brings up this really interesting question, right? Of, people might say, hey, while I was sleeping, you took my ring, I want it back, right?
Mhm.
Right. And I'm being kind of lighthearted about it, but no, we don't know of anything with it, right? That is gone, right? You use it for purpose, Israelites, right? So let's continue on with our text. All right, hold on. Sorry, challenge our right to set ourselves above the. Okay, so yeah, no, it's interesting in terms of, sorry, Joan, thank you. In terms of challenging our right to set ourselves above other practices, right? But if we're going to see what God is commanding, right? God is clearly commanding us to have God and God alone, right? But at the same time, yeah. So let's continue on, just because I'm aware of time. And you shall take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have assigned the land for you to possess. Right. So now they're going to get into this land that they that is not only the fighting forces get done, right, but God has assigned it for us to possess, for our ancestors to possess, and therefore God is seen as acting in history to help make that happen. It's an interesting question. If I keep on the previous slide, 2 slides ago, is, does it work to erase, right? So when they get into the land, does it work to get rid of all of these high places and all of these stone places and all of these idols? Can you really wipe out all of them? And if not, what happened? So it's an interesting question, and that's why I named this, right, National Memoricide, of what happens there. How do we actually think about uh, um, whether that works, and whether, in fact, in this day and age, we want to do that, right? Do we think that that's ethical to take away all of what was, whether it's the archaeology or whatever? I mean, we saw this like in the, many times, but just what came to mind is in the Syrian civil war, how many, right, ancient uh, everythings were destroyed. So it's a really good question, I think, in terms of that, in terms of how much we take away the stories, right? And we can think about this in terms of even textbooks and websites who don't speak of American slavery, who don't speak of the Holocaust or other ethnic cleansing, right? That does that serve anyone well, right? To take down African American leaders from the history of America, for example, right? And so I think that, again, the relevancy of Torah, as always happens, comes forward too. So with that kind of little comment, I'll let you respond in the chat. So you should take the possession of land and settle in it. So per Rashi and Ramban, this is the first time there's actually a commandment, a positive commandment, to dwell in the land of Israel. We actually have not had this yet. And the borders, which we're not going to get to, but if you continue reading in this chapter, in 33 of Numbers, you're going to see what the borders are, which, by the way, differ in different places in the Hebrew Bible. But so let's think about then, what's the difference between taking possession and settling, right? Because that was all in that verse, that you shall take possession and settle. So one idea is actually in Pinine Halacha, so it's Halacha, Jewish law, right? You shall take possession denotes conquest and sovereignty, while settle implies inhabiting the land to prevent it from being desolate. So that's really interesting to me, right? One is to like have ownership over land, right? And the other is to actually be there. So my question to you all is, what does it mean to settle in a land? So whether it's a land that looks a little bit empty, or whether it, like my picture here, or whether it is a land that is, fuller already, what does it mean to settle in it?
We'll go to Michael.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I guess it means to settle as you're staying there, whereas possessing it means you're possibly occupying it.
Great. So Michael or anyone, what do you need to stay?
People, development, if necessary, I guess, force. We're not leaving it. We're staying here. That's the end of it.
Yeah, relevance for today, though I'm worried what's going to happen in the chat. but relevance, just meaning that you're not going to listen to me anymore, but that's okay. You all have a lot to say to each other. But yeah, so relevance again for this in terms of what does it mean to settle? Susie.
I'm kind of thinking, and I could be so wrong, is to make it a holy place for God and follow the rules that God has set out, like about agriculture, about the forgiveness, resting the land, making it different than any other place on earth because it was given theoretically, I think, to a holy people to be holy in a holy place, a
Which
dwelling
is
place for God on earth.
That's great. And I'll make a comment after Cheryl. Cheryl, please.
Are you able to? Yeah, great.
You have to be able to have access to all of your needs. You need to have enough food for everyone. You need to have enough shelter for everyone. You need to have enough water for everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. So when we think about this, it's an interesting question of, all right, Bob, and then I'm going to make my comment.
I think it has to do with our psychology. When we settle, we live with what that land can provide, and if necessary, we find ways to improve it rather than we migrate to another place. In other words, we give up the idea of the grass is always greener. Let's keep moving.
That's lovely. Thank you. All of you, all three comments together. It was really fabulous. So, so when we think about it, I just took a Talmudic verse here. A Talmud Chacham Torah study is not allowed to live in a city. It does not have these 10 things. So it might be set to, you have to establish these things. A Beit Din law court that metes out punishments. A tzedakah fund that is collected by 2 people and distributed by 3. So, right, charity fund. A synagogue, a bathhouse, mikvah, a bathroom, a doctor, a craftsperson, a bloodletter. Some versions add a butcher and a teacher of children. So if we think about, in those times, in Talmudic times, right, what is needed to settle, you're not allowed to move somewhere unless these things are there, or maybe you build them. And it's interesting, right? One of the things that's really interesting to me in the Torah verse is that the first thing is not to somehow build an altar to God. That does come up elsewhere and in Deuteronomy, which again, some believe that the book of Deuteronomy was written after they got to the land. But here we have, okay, possess it, settle in it. And the next verse, I'm going to keep going here, is you shall apportion the land amongst yourselves by clan, by lot, clan by clan, with larger groups increase the share, with smaller groups reduce the share. Wherever the lot falls for it, that shall be its location. You shall have your portions according to your ancestral tribes. And this is going to come later in the Torah portion with detail. But here we're getting kind of the overview, as it were. But here we go again. If you do not dispossess the inhabitants of the land, those whom you allow to remain shall be stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land in which you live. Wow, right? Okay. So just to bring it home, well, I have one more verse, so I'll just do it and then go backwards. So that I will do to you what I plan to do to them. Okay. So if we look at this, what is this about, right? So if you don't get rid of the people, the ones who are still staying, right? It's not just about, oh, you could see their idols and things like that, but stings in your eyes. One idea is that it would be from Torah Aroch, um, uh, the they prick you and make you blind, as a result of which you will constantly be misled, so that you will not be able to learn from your past mistakes. So making physically, but beyond, and will learn to copy the evil ways of these pagans, as a result of which they will harass you in your own country. And ultimately, God will expel you because you are following the idol, right? So it becomes, that's what's going to happen to you. Michael.
I was going to say, you can't compare it to now. That would probably be called today ethnic cleansing. We're not doing that.
Right.
So you can't compare it. It's not fair at all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We would call it ethnic cleansing, but we also recognize that that's happening in various places in the world.
Clear, for sure.
It's not okay. And at the same
No.
time, right, given that it is happening, but it's also, right, it's this interesting question of what if we wipe out memory? Who does that hurt? Obviously, it hurts the people who are being wiped out, right? Whether they're forced to leave or whatever it is, but what is the effect on us who would be staying in a given place?
It hurts the victimizers, when I use that term today, because you got to live with that.
Yeah, right. And right. Absolutely. Okay. Okay, Arnold, I think, yes, was next.
Yes.
When I listened to this, when I read this, I feel in a way like you're missing the forest for the trees. I mean, the whole story is about ethnic cleansing. It's very clear what our history was, and it's laying it out there and saying, you've got to accept that this is part of our existence. I mean, it gets worse in a few chapters later when we kill all the Midianite women. It's part of our history.
Right. We don't kill the virgins. We only kill the other ones. Right. No, and again, I say that lighthearted, which is a terrible sense. I'm sorry this is being recorded. But yeah, no, it is. It's really extremely difficult. And yet, I think if we only look at it as way back then, we can't have let's look at what's happening today, right? In our country and I'm in America, obviously. So in our country and around the world. So, I think it's very problematic, and I don't mean to miss the forest or the trees. But I do want to dig into, right, being in the middle of the forest, right, to go through the Pardes metaphor more fully. So in terms of this, right, otherwise, which is kind of, as it were, promise or threat here, or God will do to you what I plan to do to them. So either if you follow their cult, you're going to be expelled, or die. Or my command was meant for your benefit. And that was Sephorno, and this is Orach Chaim. My command was meant for your benefit. So if you're not going to do it, right, if you're not going to dispossess them and get rid of all of their idolatry stuff, then I have no choice but to fulfill it in respect of these people you've left behind. So, right. So it's an interesting, very different take on what would happen. What would God's choice be, as it were, in response? Deborah, and then I'm going to pull it together.
Great.
Oh, it's
Thanks. I hope this doesn't seem off topic, but I'm kind of wrestling with the idea of memoricide and the destruction of the history of Canaan, with the way that our culture is so much about remembering and preserving the minority opinion. I'm just having a bit of cognitive dissonance, and I guess maybe the only way I can resolve it is with some flavor of Jewish supremacy, but I wondered if you had thoughts.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and wish I had more time for the end of this conversation. No, I think that's the point, right? I think Torah gets us to wrestle, right? This is the point, right? That this is really hard for us in this age to be looking at this as so black and white, right? And we are about memory. We are a people of memory. We have so much about memory, but is it really only our memory, or does that hurt us, right? Does that hurt, as it were, the victimizers in this story, right? Let alone if, somebody out there today, and I'm going to start up the chat again, or continue it, were to say, oh, hey, what are those Jews studying this week? And they're going to look at this and think, oh yeah, right. Hey, they've been commanded to do this stuff, right? But I think it's about wrestling, and I can't give a bigger answer than that at the moment, but I love the question, and that you're really engaged with it. So I just want to do my very last thing, and I'm sorry we're over like a minute. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, Adonai, abide among the Israelite people. So I want to just say, invite us to think, which is now going to be thinking on your own. But we are not to defile the land because God abides in the land. God abides within the Israelite people, which obviously are not only in the land. And well, of course, we believe God is everywhere. But if God abides in the land and God abides among the Israelite people, the question I think comes back to us right now is, what land are we not to defile? If God is within our midst, in all of these places you listed when you signed on, then it comes back to us to make sure our land is not defiled because God is among us. So I know there are more questions, and Mara's going to have to decide what happens with it.
Thank you. I'm going to put my email in the chat. I just want to say one more time that these issues and questions that we're all wrestling with together can elicit like a lot of feelings in all directions. And I want to thank everyone for calmly engaging with that in the chat, or at least I'm choosing to read them calmly. And I think that's what makes this place so beautiful. So thank you for being here, and we hope to see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.